Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and over our time spent in the War Within beta, we've seen a ton of different classes and more importantly, hero talents gain a ton of popularity. Like, we all know that arcane mages are kind of everywhere right now, but it's particularly the Spellslinger arcane that's right now seeing a lot more play over the Sun Fury. Same thing can be said of playstyles like the Rider of the Apocalypse, Death Knights, Sentinel Hunters, Celestial Monks, Slayer Warriors, Void Weaver Shadow Priest, and one of the more popular ones right now, Hellcaller, Affliction, Warlocks in particular. And it looks like Warlock's hero talents over the last few weeks have actually gotten a handful of buffs, which I've been able to experiment with recently, and Hellcaller was one of those playstyles that I caught my attention during the early alpha of the game's release, or rather development, and it still continues to keep that same goodness that made it so special way back then. And I kind of wanted to go over everything that happened to Warlock so far, primarily highlighting just how amazing Hellcaller Warlocks are looking as of this moment. As always, if you guys enjoy these kind of regular overviews of classes in the War Within beta, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. Now, I will get into some of the more generalized changes because usually like to talk about general things as well as hero talent stuff, but I gotta say, the Hellcaller Affliction in particular is so incredibly fun to play. I've been checking this one out over the last few days, and my goodness, it's just a joy. The playstyle itself, the dot heavy Warlock with Hellcaller, it is still as good as the first time I got to try it out. It's just so incredibly fun. It is still very familiar to the base Warlock gameplay. Like, you'll find so many different elements that are very core and very familiar to what Affliction Warlock plays right now in live, but Hellcaller just steps it up a little with that dot heaviness, which is such an improvement, especially when you're attacking multiple enemies at once in a long-term cleave situation. So certain Mythic Plus scenarios where you don't really want to sink cooldowns into 3 mobs that are going to be living for a while, but you are really feeling that impact of the sustained damage increase. Anyway, let's dive back into some of the baseline Warlock changes. So when it comes to Warlocks and really all classes over the last few weeks, they've really been toning down some of the personal responsibility. Some classes hit a little bit harder than others, but essentially healing for everybody is going down just a pinch. For Warlocks, it's going to come in terms of the talent of Demon Skin, which allows you to recharge the rate of Soul Leech by an additional % every second, up to a maximum of 15%. The Demon Skin Absorb, however, it looks like the tooltip hasn't reflected the blue post, but it's essentially going to have its rate reduced from 0.4 down to a 0.24% maximum, with a max reduced from 15% to a 10%. So it is going to be striking a little bit at the overall defensive passive nature of Warlocks. I think Warlocks are probably going to feel it, but the class is generally and historically has been tanky, so you might actually not feel this change whatsoever. Another change that has happened, and that's going to be, looks like it's another change that did this time. This one is actually reflected from the blue post onto live, so it looks like some of these are not in, some are in, but Soul Conduit now has a 10% chance to refund a Soul Shard when it is spent for Destruction and Affliction, but still keep it at a 5% for Demonology in particular. With that, they even got a quote where they said they're increasing the effectiveness of Soul Conduit for Aff and Destro due to the lower Soul Shard generation and spending rates those two specs have compared to Demonology, where Demonology can turn out Soul Shards with every single cast of Shadow Bolt, which does give them a slight edge in terms of the generation and spending, where they get to spend 3 at a time. I guess what they're trying to really do is try to kind of equate the field a bit between Demo, Affliction, and Destruction, but it's a buff for both of those specs either way, so you can't really knock it for improving those two playstyles a little bit further. Now, a huge majority of the changes that Warlocks have seen is going to come from their hero talents, which doesn't seem as big at first, but the way that those hero talents play into both the two classes, or the two specs they end up supporting, like Hellcaller, for example, which is a playstyle available for both Destruction and Affliction. A couple of changes to that one hero talent can make pretty big changes to the two specs that have access to this playstyle in general. So the changes kind of end up having a bit of this like roll-off effect. But with Hellcaller, there's been a couple of different talent redesigns, such as the talents of Zalan's Cruelty and Zalan's Ferocity, which are the same for either of the two specs. With Zalan's Ferocity, fire damage dealt by your spells and abilities is increased by 2%, and your fire spells gain 10% more critical strike chance from all sources. With Zalan's Cruelty, this is the same effect but for shadow damage, where shadow abilities deal 2% more damage, and your shadow spells gain 10% more critical strike chance from all sources. The reason why this is significant is specifically for abilities that are of Shadow Flame variety. Shadow Flame, which encompasses both of the elements together, allowing it to double dip from both of these effects. For Hellcaller, in the most basic way, this is going to amplify their Wither ability, which is an amalgamation of Destro and Affliction, creating a Shadow Flame damage over time effect, with a heavier leaning for damage over time for Affliction, less of a damage over time, but still a significant portion of damage over time increase for Destruction. And this affects every other Shadow Flame ability available for either one of the two specs. For Affliction, there aren't too many Shadow Flame sources. We do have the talent of Malefic Touch, where Malefic Rapture deals additional Shadow Flame damage for each target it affects, which is, I guess it does get some buffs for this talent specifically, but recently they've actually adjusted one of the core abilities of Affliction so that it functions better with that talent. And that is being Malefic Rapture, which has previously been known as an ability that deals pure shadow damage. So in a recent hotfix, they've adjusted its element to be Shadow Flame, which allows it to gain benefit from both of these talents, which is overall a damage increase for Affliction Warlocks that are Hellcaller, while still retaining this dot heaviness that is provided with the buff of Wither. For Destruction Warlocks, the Shadow Flame mechanic is a little bit more nuanced, however. If we spec it to the Hellcaller really quickly, you do have a handful of abilities that have a bit of Shadow and a little bit of Shadow Flame to it. For example, your primary Cataclysm ability is pure Shadow Flame damage. Cataclysm also applies a bunch of Wither, since Withers replace your Immolation, so this is an easy way for you to be able to spread Wither to multiple targets. Another ability that also has Shadow Flame value is Shadow Burn, which has some limited play, but technically it now has a bit of this double dip potential from both of these talents, which should on paper make it better. And technically, and this is really depends how they end up tuning this right here, but Chaos Bolt is an ability that is of Chaos variety, where Wither is directly Shadow Flame, Conflagate is easily Fire, Chaos Bolt is everything at once. So Chaos Bolt should technically gain the most amount of benefits out of this talent combo. But I think at the end of the day, that'll really matter how they end up making Chaos Bolt interact with the Hellcaller and the Shadow Flame buff value, because not all abilities are coded similarly. There are some effects, like for example, you used to be back in BFA, certain shadow trinkets, which would be amplified by a Shadow Priest mastery or even Affliction Warlock mastery, because at some point it would increase all shadow damage done. Or like for example, if you had a trinket that does frost damage on a Frost Death Knight and you have a mastery that buffs all frost damage, they had to specify that it meant only Frost Death Knight ability damage, not trinkets and other effects. So it all depends how they end up kind of evaluating the ability, but it should be a nice buff for destruction when it comes to amplifying the overall effectiveness, besides just, giving them a very powerful dot. So either way, a buff in that regard. Another talent that got a couple of changes has been Seeds of the Demise. After Wither reaches 8 stacks, or when the enemy host reaches below 20% health, Wither will start eating at the foe, doing immediate Shadow Flame damage for every stack that it has, and eating up those stacks until left with 1. When Blackened Soul deals damage, which is kind of primary way of how Blackened Soul can be practiced through his Wither eating up itself when he hits so many stacks, whenever this effect happens, you have a chance to either gain 2 stacks of Flashpoint, which over as a, if I can find it here, as a Destruction, that is a talent that now gains a bit more value. Normally a great talent when attacking enemies that are fully healthy. This allows you to continue to get a haste buff here and there whenever you get the procs of that Wither ability. For Affliction Warlock, the buff that you get with the Seeds of their Demise ability is Tormented Crescendo, which gives you a random proc to make a next Rapture, cost no soul shards, and be cast instantly, which makes Affliction Warlocks even more mobile heavy, even though they're already a fairly high mobility type of class. They've also adjusted the damage output of Blackened Soul to make sure that this isn't falling behind either, since part of the main way that you play Hellcaller as either Destro or Affliction, as you spend soul shards, you get to empower your Wither dot, increasing stack count by 1. The ability of Malevolence has also been redesigned, which is the capstone ability for Hellcaller. It's kind of like your own little PI that you have every 1 minute. It causes your Wither, targets affected by Wither, to take instant Shadow Flame damage, increasing the stacks of Wither by 6. So if there are 2, 3, or 4, you can immediately snap it to an 8, where it starts consuming on itself immediately. While corrupted with Malevolence, For 20 seconds, your haste is increased by 8%, and spending soul shards on damage and spells grants an additional stack of wither, which allows you to really ramp up that dot element very quickly. That did end up reducing the haste amount that you get out of this ability from 15% down to 8, but trust me when I say this, it still does feel quite noticeable in terms of the amount of raw stats that you are able to gain when you press the Malevolence button. And when it comes to the overall playstyle of the Hellcaller in particular, whether it's Gesture, whether it's Affliction, I'm a big fan of that damage over time component, and that is super fun to play into. For Affliction, it has an obvious interaction of making the dots a lot more aggressive and a lot more powerful. Now, if you can spread that with the dots super heavily and super quickly on multiple enemies, it allows you to retain some kind of like a very potent damage over time component on those foes. And since you have so many different talents that interact with Wither, since you have talents that buff corruption like Absolute Corruption, make it a permanent, it makes weaving in withers and maintaining withers a lot easier. So it just ends up kind of fitting super well into this already fun playstyle, and I love the amount of raw dot damage that you're able to put out as Affliction. It is great for mechanics, it is great for movement, and I think for a lot of newer players coming into Affliction, coming into trying out Hellcaller, I think they're gonna have a much easier time with it, because as long as your dots are on the target, and as long as you're playing around that main dot wither mechanic, you should be able to do majority of your damage fairly easily. I'm still holding out hope maybe somebody will figure out a build that can go like almost like a cooldown less Affliction Warlock where you have the most amount of sustained damage while not investing heavily into massive amounts of overall cooldowns. And I wonder if maybe some kind of playstyle like this could be achieved where Affliction could, even for like a season, return back to like a maintenance dot debuff kind of a class. And I wonder if something like this could be achieved at some point throughout the War Within expansion. Now, another hero talent that's got a couple of changes has been Soul Harvester. They've been updating this one here and there, though honestly, I don't really see nearly as many players playing Soul Harvester as Demonology or Affliction. For the most part, it is Hellcaller or Diabolus. But Soul Harvester doesn't mean that it's a bad spec, it's just I think it comes down to the tuning and the basic gameplay. I feel for Demonology in particular, this one is a lot more passive and not as interactive compared to Affliction Warlock, which kind of does end up feeding into more of this, like using your dots to amplify the rest of your abilities playstyle, where your dots are there and they are present, but for the most part, you'll use your damage over time abilities to amplify other abilities, such as your Shadow Bolt or your Drain to make it more powerful, or your Malefic Rapture, giving you a much better burst window. So there's been a couple of changes for Soul Harvester in particular, in terms of mostly the playstyle, such as with the talent of Succulent Soul and how that functions. The demonic entity now inhabits your soul, allowing you to detect a soul shard that has a Succulent Soul in it. A Succulent Soul empowers the next Malefic Rapture or your next Hint of Gul'dan, increasing its damage by 20%, and unleashing your Demon Soul, which deals additional shadow damage to that enemy target. Then we also got adjustments to the talent of Shadow of Death, which has been redesigned a little. Your Soul Rot and Demonic Tyrant now empower your demonic entity within your body, causing it to grant you 3 soul shards instantly that all contain a Succulent Soul, which gives you a little bit more of this like controlled way to be able to guarantee that you're getting a bunch of soul shards and then can utilize them for a bunch of bursts altogether. So if I were to spend a bunch of soul shards right now, and I do have Wither on this dummy, so my damage is going to be kind of all over the place. But if I need soul shards immediately, now applying the ability of Soul Rot allows you to gain this guaranteed opportunity to get quite a bit of burst out of your Warlock immediately. And you can see this demon kind of showing up behind me once in a while whenever I'm using Malefic Rapture, and I get that Succulent Soul consumption, or if I'm using a Shadow Bolt and I get the also the demon popping in from behind me. So it's going to be a playstyle where you're kind of trying to activate the demon and using it mostly to empower some of your other abilities using your dots. Whereas Hellcaller is more about maintaining your dots and keeping them as strong as possible. You're kind of using your dots and procs of dots in order to summon up the demon to add additional damage and add an extra dot, which is quite a bit of damage overall though. But the demon itself does end up amplifying some of those basic abilities and also adding that dot of Anathema on top of it. So it really amplifies your Malefic Rapture, really amplifies your Shadow Bolt, which I really should be running together with Wither and Bolt just to make it even better, just because there's so much interaction with that instantaneous damage, instantaneous ability gameplay. Demonic Soul ended up being supplementary, the Anathema dot is supplementary together with the rest of it kit, and there's all these other little benefits that you can get out of it as well. there's a good opportunity that there's going to be a lot of tuning for it comes to all these hero talents, and I'm sure the Blizz on their end has a lot of data suggesting and seeing like which hero talents are getting played, which are not getting nearly as much play, what are the damage differences for single target profiles, AoE profiles and such from all the testing and raid and dungeons that we've done so far on the beta. But I'm really hoping that Soul Harvester is not a hero talent that will end up falling behind, because I actually find it kind of fun, just a different kind of fun with Affliction. I think if you played the Affliction of old, you enjoyed kind of the heavy dot approach that it used to have, and you miss it, and that's what the Hellcaller is there to do. You still have a burst window, but you kind of use a new burst to ramp up that dot, and that's incredibly fun and super satisfying to play into. Where Soul Harvester is kind of like the more recent variations of Affliction, which have them put up dots that are there, and they're going to do a decent bit of damage, but those dots are really there to empower some of your other abilities, like your Rapture, like your Shadow Bolts, and give you all those more instantaneous procs. So if you don't really want to play this damage over time, kind of wait for your damage to come out fully Affliction, and you want to be more instantaneous, more impactful, more in the moment, then Soul Harvester will be that better playstyle that feeds into that bursty nature. Plus the visuals of having this demon pop out of nowhere or whatever, I really like it. I just kind of wish they weren't like literally behind you, like maybe off to the side, off to the left, popping out here and there out of nowhere. Maybe like an animation that looks like you're like still tethered to your body, tethered to your soul. I think that would be really cool, because otherwise I did find some moments where I'm using Soul Harvester and it feels like the demon is super in my face, and I almost sometimes can't really tell where I am or if something is in front of me and I should be moving to dodge it. So that's been a little bit interesting, but maybe there will be glyph at some point in the future to maybe tone down that visual effectiveness for the player themselves. Either way, the Warlock's still looking amazing. Hellcaller in particular looks absolutely insane, and I've been having a ton of fun with it, but honestly, who cares what I think about all these Warlock changes? I really want to hear you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. What are your thoughts between Soul Harvester Affliction or Hellcaller Affliction? If you went down to those two, which one of those two would you pick? A dot heavy Affy or more of a burstier Affy that uses dots to amplify their damage? Which one of those two, just on flavor alone, sounds like the most fun to you right now? And which one are you probably going to end up playing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.